Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot to EDP New for having me here. I think this is quite an interesting subject to try to understand what happened to the European electricity market roughly 1 year after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. If we look at the evolution of gas prices during 2022 on the left, and of electricity prices on the right, it is easy to notice that they follow the same pattern, which hints that electricity prices have been driven by gas prices. And that is correct. As we are in a marginal market, the market price is the clearing price, which is the price in which the supply curve crosses the demand curve. And as the marginal technology are most often CCGT, combined cycle gas turbines, with an efficiency of around 50%, we have roughly that electricity prices are 2 times the price of gas plus zero point 0.4 the cost of CO2. If, by example, the price of gas is 50 euros per megawatt hour, and the CO2 price is 90 euros per ton, then if we make the computations, we reach the price for electricity of 136 euros per megawatt hour, which is the kind of prices that we are having these days. It is worth noting that this was an European problem. Europe was hit the hardest. If you look in Europe, Italy, France, and Germany have been the ones hit the hardest. Spain and Portugal in average, and to the right, Australia, India, and the United States much less than the European countries. Europe was not very lucky during 2022. The lack of Russian gas was aggravated by huge problems in France's nuclear fleet and by the fact that it was a very dry year. Europe lost during the year 82 terawatt-hours of nuclear production and 64 of hydro. This was in part compensated by solar and wind new additions, and not so good by coal and gas having had to work many more hours. Coming back to the root of the problem, the fact is that Europe, and especially Germany, had become addicted to the Russian gas. A huge network of pipelines built throughout the years had made it very cheap and convenient. The capacity of this network is huge. A part of it is still in operation, even in this situation of war. Just to look at the figures, just Nord Stream 1, a pipeline which everyone has heard about, had the capacity of 55 BCM, that is roughly 550 terawatt hours, which is 11 times the electricity consumption of Portugal in 1 year. Germany is in the heart of the problem. They are huge importers of natural gas with a yearly value of 1,674 terawatt hours, and 67% of it was from Russia. Next, it was from Norway and the Netherlands. What In what does Germany use its natural gas? It's mainly in the industry, both as feedstock and in combined heat and power schemes. This gave Germany industrial companies a huge advantage, to the point that BASF, which is one of the biggest, stating that with the current prices of gas, they can no longer operate from Germany. Then it is householding. In Germany, in winter, it is really cold and one freezes, and more than 10 million households are eaten with gas. then offices and public services, and electricity, it's the area in orange is not much, just 12%. And then you have district heating, which is something very peculiar to the northern countries, where heat is generated centrally on an area and then distributed through pipes in the neighborhood. As you can see, this is not an electricity problem. It is a gas problem. How did EU react to all this? By launching Repower EU, which is the Union's plan to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels before 2030. Not tomorrow. We are still using a lot of Russian fossil fuels today. Repower Unit targets 900 gigawatts of renewables additions by 2030. A big figure. Just remember that by 2021 we are using 346 gigawatts and now we are adding 900. Then the program has lots of initiatives from power grids to biomethane, energy savings, heating electrification, mobility, of course, renewable hydrogen, a huge target there, and some very difficult ones, for instance, within industry electrification. An example, by 2030, EU aims at having 30% green steel. And green steel is made by replacing as feedstock coal, that is coke, by green hydrogen. A really difficult one. It is basically happening. And for Germany, LNG, liquefied natural gas, helped make the difference. And something I had never heard about, FSRUs, came into the game. FSRUs are floating storage and regasification units. Basically, they are old tankers which have been refurbished to act as regasification terminals, doing a bit what, for instance, Sinch regasification terminal does. And some of them have even large dimensions equivalent to Sinch, something in the order of the 6 BCMs. You can see in the diagram on the left that Germany today does not import gas from Russia and has replaced it with gas from the Netherlands, Norway, and many other origins. And it even has a bit of domestic production. For Portugal and Spain, it was the Iberian mechanism that made the difference. But now, as we are going to see, it start disappearing. But it has a huge impact in days with a lot of renewables. I show here 2 days. Day one is the 28th of January, a Saturday, a day with very low load, and the prices in Portugal were low as compared with other European countries, aligned with those of Scandinavia. Scandinavia, from the prices point of view, has always been considered an alien. Day two is the 10th of February, last Friday, where we are still in a reasonable situation, but not comparable with Scandinavia. As we can see in 4, it was a day with not so much renewables, namely wind, which is the dark blue band, and CCGTs, gas turbines, had to run all day. Therefore, as we can see above on 3, average marginal prices have been 142.05, still reasonably low for these times, but not as they used to be in other days. If I pick 9 p.m., which is one of the highest prices of the day, now remember that the Iberian mechanism started last year on 14th of June with a reference gas price of 40 euros per megawatt hour, and as of January this year, it started increasing by 5 euros per megawatt hour per month and is presently at 50 euros per megawatt hour. It will end in next June if not postponed. If marginals are paid as if the gas had the reference price of 50 euros per megawatt hour, while marginals are the only one being paid as if the gas has costed the real market value of 54.37 euros per megawatt hour. Now, as the price of the gas in the market is so close to the Iberian mechanism reference value, the mechanism is not doing much. What lies ahead? First of all, a lot of renewables. Wind and power put new challenges as they are volatile. Here, I have simulated what will happen in 2030 when we have 9,000 megawatts of wind, if the resource is the one which happened in 2021. You can see that the energy produced changes a lot. Just notice from one day to the other how much it does vary. The same for solar, but here we recognize a seasonal pattern. We see that there is much more daily production in summer than in winter, but again, it does change a lot from day to day. Now, this graph looks a bit cluttered, but the black line is the daily load for each hour of the year. And in blue, I have drawn what is called the net load. That is, I subtracted from load the hourly production of wind and solar. You again see a lot of volatility. It does change a lot. And we can see that the amount of energy which is below zero, that means excess energy, is huge. And we have only two choices for this energy, either store it or curtail. Here we have a huge challenge for R&D of finding ways to optimize this, this renewable energy. With all that looks too much, I'm sure it can be used. To understand better, I have zoomed on a week. Here it is a week starting on 19th of July, and now we start to recognize the pattern of the days in black. We recognize weekends, we lower a load and the pattern of each day, and again I subtracted wind and solar to get net load and reached the line in blue. And again, we see that it does change a lot from day to day, from hour to hour, and there is a huge amount which is below zero. That means excess energy. And here we again have the choice of either store or curtail it. Yes, that means throwing it away. There are new challenges on the way. Here we have a day with very little wind and solar resource. In fact, it was the 17th of February of last year, and I have scaled it up for 9 gigas of wind and 9 gigas of solar. We have the line in red, which is solar, centered around midday, and then we have added to it the wind, little wind, the green, and it is a day where we had to run a backup thermal power plant, a CCGT, And I see that even with 2705 megawatts of CCGT, I have to play with storage by storing when there is too much energy, too much power, and using it when needed. Again, it's just as an example of the type of things we'll have to do in the future. Another example I want to draw your attention to is for the duck curve, which is an expression coined by the Californian Independent System Operator, Casio. We have noticed that as lots of solar start to appear in the system, we start to have huge ramps. Just to test it, I have used an example, the Wednesday, the 27th of July 2022. I have the real demand of the day in green and the real generation photovoltaics in red, 1538 megawatts. And then what I did, I started increasing photovoltaics until I reached 6,000 megawatts, which in fact is not too much. Remember, then for 2030 we'll have 9,000, and I reach the line in blue for 6,000. And again, I noticed that when we approach sunset, the net load starts to increase very fast, and it will be difficult to meet it with classic thermal power plants. And it's a challenge. It's one of the challenges we have in the future. Now, just remember you of the load duration curve. This concept, in Portuguese, you say monótona, as monótonas. The low duration curve is built, if you remember, in following way. In the left, I have the daily load curve, and from it, I derive the load duration curve by starting with the peak load and then drawing in decreasing order the decreasing order the loads along the day. I get the figure on the right where I identify also again a base load, then an intermediate load, and last a peak load. If I do this for the whole year of 2021, I think we can draw some conclusions from here. I have in the black the load duration curve for the load of the whole year, and then I starting building computing net loads, load duration curves of net loads. The blue is by subtracting the wind power from the load. Then I subtract the solar, get the red. Then subtract the bio energy, I get the light blue. And last, I get the green light by also subtracting the hydro runoff river. Therefore, just to recall, I subtracted from the load all non-dispatchable types of generation to get the green light. And here, what are the conclusions I can take from this? First, that 44% of the hours of the year we have too much generation or excess generation, and it amounts for 7.3 terawatt hours. I have to be able to store it and then to use it when there is lack of energy. It is to the left where we have 9.9 terawatt hours missing, which I will have either to fill with energy which I have stored or else run thermal power plants. I believe it makes sense to run CCGTs. Another conclusion I take and is that if I want, and in some scenarios it could make sense, if I want to build a nuclear power plant, for instance, of 1 gigawatt, 1,000, I can only conclude that it will only have 4,000 hours to run, and that it doesn't make sense for a nuclear whose vocation is to run both economic and technical, is to run as base load. Then I will try to be a bit, and I'll try and I believe I will succeed in being a bit provocative. I start by recalling Tony Seba and his model of 100% solar, wind, and batteries. Uh, the guy is a renowned economist and futurist from Stanford, wrote a couple of books on the subject. And what he has computed is that when we had a lot of wind and power to the system, that may seem excess power, lots of power, he concluded that we don't need too much storage, just 1 to 5 days of storage to be completely 100% SWB, solar, wind, and batteries. It may look crazy, but if, as he says, the next 10 years, the cost of solar and batteries will again decrease 70%, perhaps it's not so crazy. And just to check that the computations make sense, I picked October 2022, which was a month with not too much wind and not too much sun, and considered that I had constant wind power of 9161 megawatts and started increasing solar like crazy. Started with line in black, which is 11,586 megawatts, and then increased to 20 gigamegawatts of solar, which is the line in brown, then to 30 gigawatts of solar, which is the line in green, and finally the solar, the 40 gigawatts of solar, which is in line in pink. In the line in pink with 40 giga, I see that I am always meeting the daily consumption, which is 150 gigawatts. I assumed it was the same as this year. And then even with line in green, if you do the balance in average, I am above the demand, and if I can store this amount of energy, I can survive with just SWB, solar, wind, and batteries. Just being provocative, but in the future, we will have to face very different scenarios. And since we are on long shots and being provocative, let me add my own provocation and the concept I am very fond of the EU supergrid. And I start the Iberian link. If we are having difficulties connecting Spain with France, why not build a direct link from the Iberia to the UK? UK is connected with most of the neighborhood countries with submarine cables, some very long, and it's working very well. It is a way of going around France. Then another provocation, X-Links. X-Links is a project from a promoter from the UK who is proposing to build a cable from the south of Morocco to the UK to allow for the transport of wind and solar production in the desert in the south of Morocco. The submarine cable, runs close to our coast. And here, my provocation: why do not invite the promoters to connect the cable to the Portuguese network, for instance, close to Sines, and there they would have the possibility of getting excess solar and wind energy produced in the Iberian Peninsula. And last but not least, the EU supergrid, which is a concept which has been around for years. And with this concept, supergrid, high voltage supergrid, probably HVDC, would be built as a new layer above the present grids, and it would be designed without constraints of borders. It would be with points of interconnection with lower voltage where it makes sense from the electrical point of view and not taking into consideration political constraints. That would be the real way to build an integrated European electrical system. Just leave you with this thought. Uh, it has been spoken in the last weeks that the energy market needs to be redesigned. ACER, which is the Association of National Regulators, have their own proposal. Everything makes sense for me. I will not go through the proposals. The thing for me which perhaps would make sense is to consider a capacity market, which doesn't seem to be one of the ideas of ACER. ACER proposes and defends long-term energy contracts, and for me it is okay, it's the way to go. Where they don't seem to be in agreement is with long-term capacity markets. And here I think that systems like the Portuguese, with a lot of volatile renewable energy, would benefit to have long-term capacity contracts uh, with flexibility suppliers. They would pay just for being available, even if not producing. Typically, they would be CCGTs, storage, demand side management, and they would ensure to the consumer security of supply. I think it makes sense. Think, for instance, an hospital. An hospital will have in the basement backup diesel, which hopefully will never be called to operate, but it will be essential in the case that the mains, the distribution fails with a fault, and then it would be needed and essentially but of course even when it is not needed it should have to be paid because the investment needs someone will have to pay for the diesel to be there. Just to conclude, there are great challenges ahead. System stability, the system with renewables is going to lose inertia and new challenges will arise. Lots of resource variability. There will be new connections, hopefully through a supergrid. This will change the power flows, integrated, integrating demand side resources will be essential. The consumers will be empowered. There will be big data around which we'll have to learn to use. And most of all, we'll have to be able to unlock flexibility. That is mandatory for systems with lots of renewable. Thanks for listening.